Hey you guys, today we're making gluten-free challah bread. If you've never had challah bread, you are in for a treat. It's soft, it's slightly sweet, it's eggy and rich, it's light at the same time. It's one of my favorites now. So let's get started. So I already weighed out my bread flour blend in the bowl of my stand mixer, and I'm going to add granulated sugar, psyllium husk powder, salt, baking powder, and instant yeast, also known as rapid rise yeast. I think it's also known as bread yeast. It goes by several different names. It's the instant kind, the kind that you don't have to bloom in water first. So mix this all together. And I know a lot of you sugar phobia people are going to balk at the amount of sugar in this dough. I've tried it with way less sugar and the texture wasn't nearly as soft as I wanted it to be. That's just the nature of baking really great gluten-free bread. You have to add things you may not normally add. And there's also over 2 tablespoons of yeast in this recipe, and the yeast needs the food in the form of sugar to rise, and that's just how it is. So here I'm adding water mixed with canola oil. You can also use vegetable oil. And then 2 whole eggs plus 1 egg yolk. The egg yolks give it a little extra richness. I like starting this dough with the paddle attachment first, just to get everything combined. And then once it's combined well and all the flour has hydrated, switch it to the dough hook and continue mixing it for 5 minutes. When ready, the dough should be very stretchy. See how stretchy that is? I always leave mine directly in the mixing bowl, but you can scoop it into another bowl or a container with a lid. If that's all you have, or if you only have one bowl for your mixer, I actually have 3 bowls for one mixer, so I'm covered when it comes to bowls. And then make sure to cover it. I always use a shower cap now just to save on single-use plastics. And instead of waiting for it to rise and then refrigerating it, we're going to put it right in the fridge immediately to do a cold rise overnight. You can't rush this dough along. A lot of people ask if they can skip the refrigerator portion of all of my bread flours or my bread doughs, and what the refrigerator does is just makes the dough cold enough to be able to work well with. Otherwise, the dough is way too sticky. You'll have a really hard time braiding it. And it's just my recommendation to leave it in the fridge at least overnight, or at least for 6 hours up to, or preferably overnight. This is half the dough. I have the other half sitting in the fridge in another sheet of plastic wrap. So liberally flour your surface, and we're just going to knead it just to smooth it out, degas it a little bit. That's the only reason for kneading gluten-free dough, because there's no gluten to develop, so we don't have to worry about that. I learned this trick actually from a priest, believe it or not, of all people, teaching how to make Jewish bread. He teaches a bread baking class on Craftsy, and what you do is you either press or roll out the dough into a small rectangle and then cut it into however many pieces you want. I'm doing 4 right now. It just makes it easier to get the strands going, especially when it's gluten-free dough that doesn't stretch very easily like regular gluten-filled dough does. So roll it out like to about a 1/2 inch thick. Doesn't need to be perfect. You're just trying to divide it and get it in the general shape of a strand. So I cut it in half just with my bench scraper, and then cut each half in half again. And then we're left with 4 strands to then shape a little further. Okay, now to make a round challah, make basically a hashtag sign, but then weave them together like you might do a lattice crust on a pie. So one over on one side and then one under. And then squeeze the 2 in the middle together a little closer to each other. So start with an under one and move it over its neighbor, under, over its neighbor, under, over its neighbor, and then go backwards. So this one is under, go over its neighbor the other way, under, over its neighbor, under, over its neighbor, under, over its neighbor. And when you're left with the ends, just tuck them under. I used my bench scraper to put the loaf onto the parchment paper and tuck those ends under again. Instead of covering the bread to rise with like a sheet of plastic wrap, we're going to brush it with an egg wash before it rises. This will keep a skin from forming on the crust before it bakes. We'll put this in a warm, draft-free area to rise. I usually put mine in my oven that's been slightly warmed on the warm function, if you have it, and then I turn it off, but keep an eye on it because if it overproofs, it'll likely tear. It won't completely double in size, but it'll be noticeably larger and puffy. See, that's definitely larger, nicely risen. So we'll brush it again with the egg wash, and we'll preheat the oven to 375 degrees Fahrenheit. As soon as it's ready, put the bread in the oven and drop the temp down to 325 degrees Fahrenheit. And we're going to bake it for 20 minutes pull it out, brush it once more with the egg wash, and let it bake for one more time of 20 minutes. So your total baking time will be 40 minutes. Here it is, glorious gluten-free round challah. It's so soft, slightly sweet, buttery even though there's no butter in it. It might be my new favorite gluten-free bread ever. And that's saying a lot, because I love my Italian bread. But this bread is awesome, you guys. You have got to try it. Even if you aren't Jewish, it's just a really great bread. Hope you love it.